Algal blooms occur in bodies of water around the world. These blooms can be defined as a general overgrowth of algae that can discolor the water and produce thick mats on the surface. Algal blooms can be beneficial to the environment, but in some cases they can become harmful. Harmful algal blooms, or HABs, deplete oxygen and produce toxins that can wreak havoc on the environments in which they reside. A toxin is a naturally produced poison found within algal cells that can cause a wide range of health effects if introduced into a water body. John Rica, a researcher who studies these algal bloom toxins, describes how they would be released into the environment.
The only way that we know they release their toxins is by dying and the cell literally bursting open and the toxins pouring out.
Currently, though, scientists don't know exactly why HABs produce toxins. Through genetic analysis, it is known that the toxin-producing genes found in algae existed well before plants and animals evolved.
So when we think of the word toxin and what it can do to me and you, we think it must just be a defense mechanism like other animals have. But it turns out these organisms are so old, they've been around for so long, they have been producing these toxins long before we have been around or any other organism has been around that it would be toxic to. So they're actually getting some sort of evolutionary advantage by producing these toxins.
Because algal blooms are widespread, people can be exposed to HABs and their toxins. If there is an algal bloom present, there is the potential to be exposed to HAB toxins. Different types of HABs produce different toxins. There are two common types of HABs in Florida: marine blooms, or red tide, which are caused by the dinoflagellate Karenia brevis, and freshwater blooms, which are caused by cyanobacteria, most commonly Microcystis aeruginosa. Marine blooms, or red tide, are historically well known in Florida for massive fish kills and for shutting down beaches. Karenia brevis produces brevetoxins, which are a group of neurotoxins, meaning that they affect the nervous system of organisms. People can be exposed to red tide toxins through inhalation, ingestion of tainted seafood, or skin contact. Health effects from inhalation include the red tide tickle, which causes an itchy throat and cough when the toxins are breathed in. The toxins can be carried by the wind, so even if you can't visibly see the bloom, you could still feel the effects. If exposed through skin contact, a rash may occur. This rash usually subsides after rinsing off the irritant. If ingested through consuming contaminated shellfish or fish, symptoms can include nausea and vomiting, tingling of the mouth, slurred speech, or dizziness. This is the most serious form of exposure to brevetoxins, as it can cause neurological problems ranging from partial paralysis to respiratory problems. The long-term effects of red tide exposure are unknown. HABs from cyanobacteria, or blue-green algae, can occur in freshwater, brackish, or even marine systems, though they are usually found in freshwater. Cyanohabs produce cyanotoxins. These bacteria are the main cause of HABs in Lake Okeechobee. There are many different types of cyanotoxins. These toxins are classified as neurotoxins, hepatotoxins, and dermatoxins. Neurotoxins, as discussed with red tide, target the nervous system. Hepatotoxins target the liver, and dermatoxins target the skin and mucous membranes. The most commonly produced cyanotoxin is microcystin, which can be found in almost every body of fresh water on Earth. So how can people be exposed to algal blooms and their toxins?
People can come into contact with algal blooms in a variety of ways. I think the most common way that they can is just by simply living on the body of water where the algal bloom occurs. And they can either be getting into that water directly, or they could be experiencing high winds, especially on lakes that are very big, and the winds can rip across the surface of the lake, throw mist into the air and droplets, and that can carry the toxins with it, and they can end up on the land, actually not even in the water anymore. Another way is by going out to a lake where there's an algal bloom present. So most of the time, People who hunt, people who fish, and they take their boats out, a lot of times they get out of the boat, depending on what they're doing, and they can make direct contact with the algal bloom that way. And there's a variety of different toxins that can cause a variety of different effects, different symptoms. Also, there is ingestion, which can occur, especially if you're swimming in a lake. Down in here in Florida, we don't swim in our lakes too much, but we do eat a lot of fish out of the lakes, and if there's algal toxins present in certain types of fish, they can really accumulate. And so that's a more direct or maybe a secondary route of exposure by eating an organism that has been exposed to the toxin.
What are the symptoms of cyanotoxin exposure? Normal symptoms of inhalation exposure to cyanohab toxins are general respiratory issues and skin, eye, nose, and throat irritation. Symptoms of direct skin contact can include skin irritation, resulting in dermatitis, hives, and blistering. Gastrointestinal problems can occur through ingestion. In rare cases, low exposure levels can lead to hepatitis, and high exposure levels could lead to liver necrosis with the potential of liver cancer. More studies are needed on the effects of chronic cyanotoxin exposure. Avoiding HAB toxins is especially important, as there are currently no antidotes for these poisonings, and the only treatments are directed at relieving the symptoms. In addition, interpreting the public health impacts from state and county alerts can be challenging. Dr. Shirley Gordon, a researcher and professor in the Christine E. Lynn College of Nursing at FAU, has been studying the health impacts of algal blooms.
Currently, there are several state and county organizations that routinely monitor for the presence of algal blooms in water. When the algal blooms and their related toxins are identified, the health department issues health alerts to the public. Unfortunately, these health alerts are general in nature, and they usually include the type of bloom and the location where the bloom is occurring, but not any more detailed information. We are currently researching what matters most to people living near impacted waters and what communication methods they prefer to receive information about harmful algal blooms. Preliminary data suggests that people want to know more about placing the harmful algal blooms in context and what the level of risk is to them and their families.
To avoid exposure, the CDC advises, when in doubt, stay out. Before entering or fishing from a body of water, always check the local news and local guidelines, which usually can be found online, for any algal bloom risk. If there are no signs, guidelines, or local news reports, you can sometimes determine if there is a harmful algal bloom by assessing the color of the water for yourself.
An algal bloom, typically when we're talking about algal blooms, especially here in Florida, we're talking about cyanobacterial blooms, and they're usually called blue-green algae. And the reason they're called blue-green algae is because they have these pigments that are blue, and then they have these pigments that are green, and the pigments can build up in the water. Those are typically the blue ones, and the ones that build up in the cells are typically the green ones. And so when you look out over a lake that has a cyanobacterial bloom in it, it can look like this bluish, greenish type of cloud floating on the surface of the lake, or a mat.
For a red tide bloom, the water can look red or brown. Always look for signs around the edge of the water to ensure that there are no posted restrictions. Be aware that potentially contaminated seafood won't have any change in color, smell, or taste. You may not know that your food has been contaminated until you begin to experience symptoms. Assessing and reducing the health impacts of HAB toxins is a very important aspect of algal bloom research. Recently, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, in collaboration with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and many other research agencies, developed a monthly and annual bloom severity index, as well as a respiratory irritation index, both to be used in evaluation of red tide. FWC and NOAA's findings illustrate that as the bloom severity index increases, respiratory irritation also increases. Coupled with onshore winds, the most severe blooms can produce the most severe respiratory irritation. In addition to the bloom severity index research, the Center for Disease Control also recently began a study in South Florida to assess the effects of cyanotoxins in the air through the Cyanotoxins in Air Study, or CAST.
In the CDC study, we are studying the impact of aerosols from cyanobacteria on human health. In this study, we are looking at the impact on the lung function studies along with the presence of toxins in human tissues. The purpose of this study is to determine the impact on breathing.
These major research studies, as well as others which are ongoing by agencies such as Florida Atlantic University's Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute, will hopefully increase knowledge about the long-term effects of algal blooms and potentially lower the risk of exposure. Even with these ongoing research studies, there is still so much to be learned about the impacts of HABs. Perhaps some of this knowledge can be gained by understanding why HABs produce toxins in the first place.
My research focuses on the algal toxins that are produced by harmful algal blooms, mainly on what these toxins are doing for the bloom. What we really want to know is when those cells die and they release all of their toxins, how do those toxins that build up within the harmful algal bloom aid the other cells that are still alive? So what beneficial effects happen for those other cells and how do they happen?
Understanding what you can do as a resident or even a tourist is important for anyone who lives near or recreates in our Florida waters.
If you seek medical attention following exposure to a harmful algal bloom, it's important that you tell your healthcare provider that you actually experienced an exposure. They'll want to know the date of the exposure, the length and type of exposure that you experienced. In addition, if you take a pet to the vet as a result of an exposure, you'll want to share that same information with your veterinarian.
Luckily, most exposures to these toxins are not life-threatening because there is currently no treatment for poisoning other than managing symptoms. Therefore, it's vital to avoid exposure altogether. Always check your local news and guidelines for information about algal bloom risks.
People are concerned about the impact of harmful algal blooms on their health, the health of their family, and their community. And more research is needed to address these concerns.
If you see an algal bloom in a body of water, you can always report it to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. The links to these two reporting systems can be found in the references section on our website.